Right, welcome to another video, Stephen Cheatley Photography and Astronomy. That's going to be the new name of my channel. I'm changing the name of the channel because I'm going to be introducing some daytime photography into it as well, just to appeal to a wider audience. And rather than have another channel for daytime stuff and one for Astro, I don't want to do that. I'd rather have everything under my name. So that's the idea anyway, and that's what I'm going to be doing. But if you're into the astronomy side, don't worry, I'm going to be doing much more astronomy, photography and real hands-on stuff like I did in the last video with Blackpool Tower. It's probably going to be maybe 75% astronomy, photography, and then the other 25% whatever else I choose to do. It could be a review, it could be a vlog or something like that, a sunset vlog or whatever. But that's the idea anyway, and that's what I'm going to do. But certainly I'm not holding back on the astronomy photography. I'm going to be doing so much more. I've got so much planned for this year, so keep watching. Anyway, for this particular video, if you remember a couple of videos back, I did say that I was going to be reviewing this star tracker, the Fornax 10 Lightrack 2. Now, I did a little preview of it at the end of last year, and it was before I went out to Tenerife. You might have seen my Tenerife vlog, and there was not really any, I didn't think I mentioned this in the vlog at all. I didn't really have a very good time with it, to be quite honest. I think it's a really well made mount. I'm going to explain the problems that I had with it a bit later on in this video. It's very heavy, but compared to my other tracker, which that was supposed to replace, this is the Astrotrac, which I've had for about 6 years, and I was really looking to replace this just with something newer. Not that there's anything wrong with this. This is a brilliant tracker. There are many trackers out there. There's all sorts of trackers you can get. There's the Star Adventure, you might know about the Star Adventure Mini, Fixer and Polari. There's all sorts of, there's loads of them on the market now. When I bought this one, there wasn't really that many around. So really I purchased the Fornax 10 Lightrack 2 to replace this, just for something a bit newer really, just to take me going forward. But I'm having second thoughts about that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go outside in the garden and I'm going to set these trackers up side by side. I'm going to show how they work. We'll see how we go and see what you think, and if there's anything you'd like to know, just leave a comment below and I'll see if I can help. Right. Okay, so I've now come outside and I've got the Fornax 10 Lightrack 2 tracker with me here, and I'm going to be doing the two trackers, this and the Astrotrac. I'm going to be doing a review, a comparison of the two together a bit later on in the video. But the first thing I want to do is to show how to set these trackers up from the ground up. The first thing you're going to need is a tripod, a sturdy tripod. This is an old Manfrotto 055 tripod. It's quite sturdy, and it's not a bad tripod. It's not something that I use generally, but it's decent enough for mounting a tracker on. So I'm going to show how to mount the tracker from the ground up using the tracker, and then put the camera and lens and show how it all works. And then after that I'm going to do a comparison between the two, this and the Astrotrac. So let's do that then. Okay, so here we are. I'm just about to build up the system now and show you how it works. Just another point before I start. The Fornax 10 Lightrack 2 has a standard fitting for a tripod like you get on the bottom of your camera, 1/4 inch thread. On the Astrotrac it's a little bit different. That uses a 3/8 of an inch connector. Now you might be able to get an adapter for that if you haven't got one. It's not like a massive problem, but I happen to have one of those on my Manfrotto 410 geared head. I have the two quick release, I have the two fittings on there, so that's not a problem for me. Right, so I'm now going to first put in the quick release plate, make sure it's the right way around. Okay, so screw this quick release plate from the geared head into the tracker. A geared head is very important as well for polar alignment, because the controls you get on the knobs here allow you to precisely move the mount to the right place so that you can align it with the pole star. That's very important. If you're just using a ball head for this, you're going to find it very difficult, so you want to use a geared head to mount your tracker on. Okay, so I've attached a quick release plate. It has to be the certain way round. So that now goes into there, and then I slide the lock down, and that's the tracker now mounted on the geared head. That's the first stage. Now the next stage is to attach a ball head to the top of the tracker. Now this is actually a bit of a beast of a ball head. Now the thing is, if you want accurate tracking and you're using a long focal length lens, or you're using a telescope, it's important that every piece, the tripod, the geared head and the ball head, are all very, very solid. If there's a weak link, say you've got a wobbly tripod but you've got a really nice ball head, that's not going to be very good, because your tripod's going to be wobbling all over the place. Or you might have a really solid tripod and a weedy ball head. That's no good. You want everything to be rock solid if you're doing anything with long focal lengths, long lenses or telescopes, that sort of thing. So it's very important. But if you're doing wide field work, it doesn't really matter. But anyway, I'm going to now attach this to the top of the track. It's 1/3/8 there on this particular one, so that fits on there okay. No need for an adapter. So the ball head goes on there like that. Okay, and now it's time for the final piece, the camera. Let's put the camera on top of the ball head. Make sure we get this right so it doesn't fall off. You want to make sure everything's fitted correctly as well. Jiggle it about. Just one thing to watch out for as well, because this screws on like that, you have to turn it to the right. You might need to be careful when you're moving the head later, when you're tracking things and when you're manoeuvring the head around, that it doesn't unscrew, because that's a problem I've had. If you're turning it this way, back the way that you unscrew it, the actual head can unscrew, so it might be worth turning it the opposite way so that it doesn't unscrew. So anyway, this is the setup, and now what I'm going to do is look at the two mounts together and how they differ, and look at the good points and bad points of each mount. Now the Fornax 10 Lightrack 2 is very different to the Astrotrac in the motor. If I just turn this on, the motor is a friction drive as opposed to a worm drive. Now that is supposed to be more accurate. And that's one of the reasons why I bought this particular tracker. So the motor, if I just press this button here, you can see this is the way that you set the arm on the Fornax. You have to set it by holding one of these buttons down, and you swing it whichever way, whichever hemisphere you're in, to track. You swing it all the way one way, so swing it all the way this way. The tracker's now set to start, and it'll start tracking straight away. Now this is a friction drive, so there's no mesh, no gears, no nothing on this, and that's the way that this tracker works, and that's one of the biggest differences between the two trackers. Right, okay, so on the Astrotrac, this arm which swings out here is where you put your polar scope, and this particular polar scope is fitted to go in there. Now these polar scopes are very similar. This is a generic polar scope, but it's this particular one is made to fit into the slot for the Fornax, although this one's on a screw. This one's actually on a magnet, so all you have to do is push it in like that, and the magnet holds it. But it's not perfect, you can sometimes knock it off. This one's on the Fornax is it's just, like I say, it's just a generic polar scope, and you put that in there, screw it in, and this is the polar scope. This is very important because this is what you use to polar align the mount with the axis of the Earth, so that when the mount is tracking, when the motor's working, and when you turn the thing on, that your camera will then start to track the sky accurately. and depending on what focal length you're using will depend on how accurately your camera, the mount will track, because if you're using a telescope it's very important to have very accurate polar alignment. If you're just using, say, a wide length like the one I've got on here, you don't even need a polar scope. You can just look through the hole on this. You can basically just look through the hole on there, point that roughly towards north, and if you've got, say, a wide lens on, say a 24mm or something like that, you can get a minute or 2 minutes without any kind of trailing at all, as long as it's roughly aligned. But I'm now going to show a problem with the Fornax mount that I have. Now, when I was in Tenerife, the pole star, the North Star in Tenerife, is at 28 degrees. Now that's very low down compared to at home. Where I am now, Polaris is at 53 degrees up in the sky. So I had the mount quite far down. If I angle this down now, this is how you polar align using your geared head. You use these dials, and there's also, although I'm using this back to front, there's a degree scale on here. Now you can use the degree scale to get roughly where you need to be. Now, because I've actually got this the wrong way round on this geared head, because the geared head only has limited movement in one direction, so I've had to reverse it. I have to do this, look at this the wrong way round. So anyway, let's say that that's where whereabouts it was set when I was in Tenerife, because the pole star is very low down in Tenerife. So the mount will have been set somewhere around about there, like that. Okay, so the problem I had was that when I put the polar scope into this arm on the Fornax, the arm was slipped down. So even if I was trying to align the pole star and this thing was slipping around, see how loose that is? There's no click here on this. Whereas on the Astrotrac we have a click here, it clicks. So that stays, if you leave it there, it's going to stay there. And another thing as well, the arm on the Astrotrac extends further away from the mount, whereas the arm on the Fornax doesn't extend very far at all. So if I'm down here trying to polar align, my head is touching the camera, the geared head of the tripod. So that was another problem I had when I was in Tenerife. I could barely see through the polar scope because my head was too close, because the arm, I had a loose polar arm, as you can see there, it's a loose polar arm that would drop down like that. And on the Astrotrac, the polar arm extends much further out, so it's much easier to be able to polar align with the Astrotrac, and because it locks, there was no problem with it slipping or anything like that. Okay, so let's have a closer look at the Fornax and how it works. And just before I do that, I'm just going to show you the power supply that I use. 12 volt power supply. This is a tracer power pack. Very good, 8 amp hours, lasts a long time. So if you want to use a tracker, you can use a battery pack or something like this. I prefer to use these, so that's very good. That's what I use to power the tracker. Let's have a closer look at the tracker itself and all these different options. Now the first thing we notice on here, on here we have all these different tracking rates. The first one is sidereal, and this is the standard tracking rate that you would use for tracking the sky, because that's the time it takes for the Earth to make a complete revolution. And the next one we have is solar, and that's a little bit slower. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference if you're only using the short exposure. If you've got it on solar, it probably wouldn't matter too much, solar or lunar. It probably wouldn't make a whole lot of difference if you were tracking just for, not very long between the two. And the one at the bottom here is half. Now what this does is it tracks at half the rate. So if you were doing a landscape and you wanted to track the sky and you didn't want the foreground to blur too much, which is what happens when you're tracking in sidereal mode, you'll get the foreground, you'll notice the foreground blur. in the half rate mode you can get a balance of the two. You can get a decently tracked sky, you will have trailing but it'll be minimised, but you'll also have the foreground, and the foreground will not blur as much. Now I don't tend to use that. If I'm going to do that sort of thing, I'd rather track in sidereal rate and I'll do a static shot for the foreground and blend the two together in Photoshop. The next thing along here, the next thing we see is north and south. Now this is for if you live in the north or the southern hemisphere. So I'm in the northern hemisphere, so I have this set to north. So when I move this to set the tracker, this extends the arm out so that it can then start to track, and it'll track that way, and it'll track all the way that way, all the way across in about 2 hours, similar to the Astrotrac. It's now tracking now. It's making a very quiet kind of sound, and I know it's tracking, and you can see that the lights telling you that it's tracking. So that will track very slowly across until it gets to the other side, when it will stop, and then you have to reset it again. So you can't see it tracking because it's very slow, but the whole thing is moving, the camera will be moving, and it'll be tracking the sky now. So if I was to bring that back now to the centre, and if you live in the southern hemisphere, you would extend out the tracker this way. The mount would then start to track this way, so it would then follow the stars, follow the sky the other direction for the southern hemisphere. And that's the way that the Fornax 10 works. Okay, and now I'm going to show how the Astrotrac works. Again, like the Fornax, we would have the geared head angled so that the polar scope points directly towards Polaris, so whichever latitude you are, you would angle this whichever way. When I was in Tenerife, it was something like that there, 28 degrees. Back home, it's about 25 degrees further up, so it's more like that where I'd be. Right, okay, right, so I've got this plugged in, so what we need to do now is we need to move this arm out. It tells you on here north that way, so we move for the northern hemisphere, we move it out that way, and then I press this here, the play button. It's a bit more limited on the other ones. It doesn't have a half rate mode, which wasn't really a big deal for me. This is just the volume, and this one here resets the tracker once it's got to the end of its run. You press that to rewind it. Unlike the Fornax as well, this doesn't start straight away. It doesn't start tracking straight away. You have to press play to track, and then there's a green flashing LED in there which signals that it's working, because it can be quite difficult to know if it's actually moving because these trackers move so slowly. And I mentioned before as well, this uses a worm gear. The motor runs along this worm gear, and when it gets to the end after about 2 hours, you reset it. On the Fornax, friction drive, supposed to be more accurate, I don't know, but never really give it a good test. But anyway, so that's the Astrotrac. I'll just press play now to get it going. I can hear it, I can hear the motor going, so I know that it's working, and if it was dark I'd be able to see the LED working. So that's tracking now. The arm's moving that way, the camera's going to move that way and follow the stars as the stars move through our sky in the northern hemisphere, and that's the way that the Astrotrac works. Okay, now I've mounted my telescope on the Fornax now. This is a telescope which I took with me to Tenerife, and this is what I was hoping to capture some nice deep space images with my new Fornax mount. Now, of course, it was this problem I had with the polar scope, and the polar scope arm not being long enough and not allowing me to be able to get my head in, to be able to see it's loose there now, it's dropping down, and that's why I couldn't use this telescope, and I had to just give up on that, and that was very disappointing. Now, I'm not going to slag off the Fornax too much because for this fault. For me it was a problem. Maybe the model I've got has got this particular problem, or maybe this, you can tighten it up some way, but at the time there was no way I could do that. but it's a very well built mount. I know Fornax are a great brand. They build all kinds of telescope mounts, very heavy duty telescope mounts. I just not had a very good time with it myself, and I think I'm probably going to stick with my Astrotrac, to be quite honest. So I'll probably return this if they'll allow me to return it, and I'm going to stick with my Astrotrac. So that completes this review of the Fornax 10 Lightrack 2 star tracker and the Astrotrac TT320-AG star tracker, which I believe, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it already, is discontinued now. So you can't get these anymore, but I'm sure if you have a look on Astro Buy and Sell, or maybe possibly on eBay, you can get a Astrotrac second hand, and I would highly advise that too. Now Astrotrac have brought out a new model, and that's a 360 model, but it's very different to this. In fact it's huge. I don't even know how it works, to be quite honest, but it costs silly money, and it's not the sort of thing that I'm going to be going out and buying anyway, so I'm quite happy with what I've got. So I'm going to continue with my Astrotrac, and let's see what I can get with that. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and tick the subscribe button if you want to see more like this, and also check the bell icon so that you can you know when there's updates. We'll be doing a lot more stuff like this, reviews on astronomy and photography related equipment. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.